So apparently, Google, once again, caught with his hand in the cookie jar, or so to speak, in regards to leaked documents from a leaked Google briefing, now admits abandonment of free speech for safety and civility. So that's been a big topic of conversation over at Google for a while. With Google, I should say, with YouTube specifically, because YouTube is, and this is true, I want to say it's the number one most used website, and it's the number two most used search engine, right? Google being the number one search engine, YouTube being the number two search engine. And so people come here to express opinions. They come there to, they go there to express opinions and to find opinions and to have conversations with people. And there's been this, what feels like this massive stifling recently, right? A lot of people are frustrated because of the way that Google's algorithm works in terms of filters. And of course, you have stuff like Alex Jones being taken down, and people have viewed that as being a free speech issue. And YouTube argued that it had a lot to do with circumventions of disabling of live streaming, whereas others have looked at it as being trying to silence Alex Jones, which could be argued as a real thing simply because it wasn't just YouTube for Alex Jones; it was like everywhere for Alex Jones. And like, where has he been at this point, right? Like, he's even PayPal booted his ass. So, there's an argument to be made on that one. Anyway, it says here, and this is a bit of a long article, but we're going to go through it. An internal company briefing produced by Google and leaked exclusively to Breitbart argues that due to a variety of factors, including the election of President Trump, the American tradition of free speech on the internet is no longer viable. Despite leaked video footage showing top executives declaring their intention to ensure that the rise of Trump and the populist movement is a blip in history, Google has repeatedly denied that the political bias of its employees filter into its products. Well, I mean, look, to be fair on that one, my personal viewing of this has been a large number of right-leaning commentators on YouTube have blown the hell up in the last couple of years. So if they have tried to stifle it, they've failed, which means the algorithm is either working against them or working as intended. It all, I guess, depends on how you look at it. But to make the populist movement a blip in history is something that they've utterly failed at, right? They failed at that. So I don't quite know if that was just them talking out their ass or if that's them, like legitimately trying. Now, granted, the Alex Jones situation, that was a big, a big thing. But again, it wasn't isolated just to YouTube. That was across the board deplatforming, which not good, not recommending it, not agreeing with it, but saying it's not entirely a Google issue. That was a multi-company, but that could be a cabal. We have no idea. The 85-page briefing titled "The Good Censor" admits that Google and other tech platforms now control the majority of online conversations. That is very true. And they have undertaken a shift toward censorship in response to unwelcome political events around the world. Now, what I've noticed in regards to the shift toward censorship is not so much the shift toward censorship of expressing thoughts and opinions or the footage of these events. It's that they attack the monetization of them, so then people aren't able to profit off of them, which in some cases has been looked at as being a stifling of free speech. And I've heard that argument made before. Now, examples cited in the document include the 2016 election and the rise of alternative for Deutschland in Germany. I'm not too sure what Alternative for Deutschland is, but I just looking at the title of it, one can assume that it's a right-leaning organization. Responding to the leak, an official Google source said the document should be considered internal research and not an official company position. But that's kind of funny because didn't James Damore put together a document last year that was all about trying to figure out better ways to make Google more diverse and inclusive? And as a result of that, it was fired very promptly because it was considered research, even though it wasn't an official company position. I'm just saying there's a little bit of what I feel, maybe a little bit of hypocrisy on that one. Now, the briefing labels the idea of unfettered free speech on the internet as a utopian narrative that has been undermined by recent global events as well as bad behavior on the part of users. Part of that is true. I'm going to agree with that. I'm going to agree part of that is true. Because I don't get me wrong, free speech, provided you're not calling for the destruction of property or the harming of people, I think should be allowed. But there are bad actors that very much do play into part of that problem, right? Like you have people that do spread bullshit and they spread fake news, real, legitimate fake news. And they do it, and because of the way the algorithm works, it ends up being spread, right? And we know that a lie can make its way halfway around the world before the truth has the ability to put on its pants. Of course, I'm paraphrasing Mark Twain, but it's true. And so that's part of what they're talking about here. It's not so much that I think the bad behavior is not on like people having political opinions. It's bad actors on both sides or on all sides that have found ways to circumvent certain aspects of the system, as well as, utilize them for profit or for popularity. And people don't take the time to fact check because once you have that initial thought process set, it's very hard to break it. Now, it acknowledges that major tech platforms, including Google, Facebook, and Twitter, initially promised free speech to consumers, saying here, the free speech ideal was instilled in the DNA of Silicon Valley startups that now control the majority of our online conversations, which is very, very, very true. And we know that I would argue the worst offender in all of this is probably Twitter. I mean, if I say cunt from like 6 years ago, I'll get my account suspended for a week, and that's happened. that is very much happened. People have gone back through my old tweets, finding some really dumb things that I said, and I've gotten in trouble with Twitter a couple times as a result for just saying the word like cunt. Not even kidding you. Anyway, so the briefing argues that Google, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter are caught between two incompatible positions: the unmediated marketplace of ideas versus the well-ordered spaces for safety and civility. And that's the hard one. I would argue that the unmediated marketplace of ideas is probably better than the well-ordered spaces for safety and civility. Well, I do want safety and civility. It's one of those moments where you have to kind of weigh the good and the bad. Do you shut out opinions and thoughts that you disagree with for the sake of safety, or do you allow people to have them and espouse them? And it basically does boil down to that, which is one of the reasons why it's a little bit weird. It's a very, very fine line to walk, and there's no good way to get around it. It says here that the first approach is described as a product of the American tradition, which prioritizes free speech for the democracy, not civility. The second is described as a product for the European tradition, which favors dignity over liberty and civility over freedom. The briefing claims that all tech platforms are now moving towards the European tradition. Now, I would argue that does feel very true. It does. And I would argue that the reason why that's happening, I think, is because we've seen a lot of blowing up of social media in that part of the world, right? Like, it originated here in the States in the American tradition, but then as it's expanding, it's going over there. And I think it's entirely possible that there's also a lot of money coming in from that part of the world. And that is the type of tradition that they want, and the type of tradition that maybe they're paying for. That's all speculation and theory. I literally have no idea of knowing, but that's just kind of how I feel it's going. The briefing associates Google's new role as the granator, I don't know, whatever, of civility with categories of editor and publisher. This is significant given that Google, YouTube, and other tech giants publicly claim that they are not publishers, but rather neutral platforms. A categorization that grants them special legal immunities under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is true. That's again the problem that they walk, is that they find themselves stuck in a weird place, right? Again, it does boil down to the notion of they want to allow it to be open for people to talk and people to have their opinions, but they also want to make sure that people aren't on there, running rampant, that it's like an absolute like apocalypse of ideas sort of thing. And they walk the fine line. The problem with it is, though, because most of the tech companies are based out of San Francisco or the West Coast, and they're very liberal leaning, it ends up seeing that particular tilt shift that direction, and that is not good. It's not, because it does disenfranchise a number of people who then get more and more and more angry at these companies. But then again, these companies are the only players in town that get any kind of traction. You get alternatives like Gab, and Gab gets run off of the iTunes store. And I think it even got shut down from Android. And then even the other day, PayPal or not PayPal, maybe one of the other companies for like finances, like Visa or something like that. Like they ended up pulling out of Gab, right? You've got like Minds.com, and that does okay, but it's very small. But when it comes to social media, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's WhatsApp, it's Snapchat, it's Instagram. And those are all owned by major conglomerates. In fact, Instagram and WhatsApp are owned by Facebook. And Snapchat actually is in the process of losing money, and that's interesting. They're gonna I don't know why. Maybe it's all the nudes. But anyway, Google admits that Section 230 was designed to ensure that they can remain neutral platforms for free expression. So we'll wait and see. Now, one of the reasons why Google identifies for allegedly widespread public disillusionment with internet free speech is that it breeds conspiracy theories. The example Google uses, a 2016 tweet from then candidate Donald Trump alleging that Google search suppressed negative results about Hillary Clinton. Now, look, that might be one theory that they're using, but no, it's true. YouTube does, in fact, breed conspiracy theories. Case in point, during the Las Vegas shooting a year ago, a very horrific, tragic event, there was a video on YouTube that made it to like #1 on trending, suggesting that there was a second shooter, all based upon misinterpretations of 911 recordings that were coming out of Vegas. And this resulted in just massive beliefs that there was another shooter that got away, making law enforcement's job harder in Las Vegas, trying to get all the information out there in a clear, succinct, and concise manner. And it also, actually, and this is true, pushed the LVPD to no longer make their 911, their dispatch calls, their scanners open. You can't listen to the police calls anymore. As a result of that, because people took the information and they ran with it in a way that was not meant to be the way it was interpreted. And even the guy who made the video that blew up, that hit the #1 on trending, even he was like, damn, so it's like, yes, Google and YouTube specifically allows people to make conspiracy theory videos and allows them to say a bunch of shit that is not true and get a lot of traction. And I give you another example of this. Is the fact that back in 2007, when YouTube was first getting going, there was the whole, go look up anything involving Planet X or Planet Nibiru, right? The 2012 conspiracy that we were all going to die from a massive 10th planet that was going to come within our gravity. We were going to get caught in its gravitational pull and it was going to kill 90% of the planet, right? People believed it because it was videos they saw on YouTube. There's been multiple times this has happened. It exists. I'm not saying that it is like entirely an issue, but no, Alum here is downplaying the fact that you can sit there and make conspiracy theories on YouTube. That's one of the reasons why, you have to take these kind of articles with, again, a grain of salt. Now, it says here, at the time, Google said it suppressed negative autocomplete suggestions about everybody, not just Clinton. But it was it was comparatively easy to find such autocomplete results when searching for Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. Independent research from psychologist Robert Epstein shows that Google search results, if not autocomplete results, did indeed favor Clinton in 2016. Well, that could also be because people were talking about her more. I don't know. I'm just pointing it out there. They were talking about her more, but Trump ultimately won the electoral game. So, twice in the document, Google juxtaposes a factoid about Russian interference in the American elections with pictures of Donald Trump. At one point, the document admits that the tech platforms are changing their policies to preempt congressional action on foreign interference. The document did not address the fact that, according to leading psychologists, the impact of foreign bots and propaganda on social media has a negligible impact on voters. Well, whether or not it has a negligible impact on voters, it still happens. So trying to downplay that again, I believe, is disingenuous. But then again, I am coming at it from a different perspective than Alum, and that's his opinion. Now, it says here, it's unclear from whom the Good Censor was intended. What is clear, however, is that Google spent or paid somebody a significant time and effort to produce it. According to the briefing itself, it was a product of an extensive process involving several layers of research, including expert interviews from MIT Tech Review and editor-in-chief Jason Ponton, Atlantic staff writer Franklin Foyer, and academic Kalev Litaru. 35 cultural observers and 7 cultural leaders from 7 countries on 5 continents were also consulted to produce it. What is also clear is that many of the briefing's recommendations are now reflected in the policy of Google and its sibling companies. For example, the briefing argues that tech companies will have to censor their platforms if they want to expand globally. Google is now constructing a censored search engine to gain access to the Chinese market. Now, that should be the argument here, is that they have to construct a censored internet in order to get into these other countries, right? Like Google and Twitter and Facebook, they're obviously profit driven, right? They are. Google dropped the moniker of "Don't be evil" or whatever it was many years ago. And so to get into China, where there's going to be an emerging middle class and there's a lot of money to be earned in China, Hollywood has already done this. They are now trying to figure out ways to get in there and do it where there's, they comply with the government of China, and what that's restricting speech. But no one here is like, what about the guys in China? That's all I'm saying is I think they need a little bit of help. Now it says here, the document also bemoans the internet allows to have Go commentators or have a Go commenters. In other words, ordinary people to compete on the level playing field with alternative sources like the New York Times. The Google-owned YouTube now prioritizes so-called authoritative sources in its algorithm. The company did not specify the name which sources it would promote. And that's true. That is happening. They are, in fact, doing that. And then after that, it just gives you a page-by-page breakdown. So it does appear that Google, at least through this document, is trying to figure out where problems are and trying to determine whether or not, pushing towards safety and civility is going to be the better move. I have seen, Twitter definitely, I think, does this. Facebook does this. Google and YouTube, not as much yet. They do have an interesting, I think they have it from what I have seen with their filters and how they handle certain things. Like when it comes to content, they do have an algorithm bot that does look through and like really scan everything, because keep in mind, there's like 400 hours of content uploaded every single minute, right? So they run through a lot of that, and the vast majority of takedowns and the vast majority of bannings, takedowns specifically, end up happening from a bot. Right, all the YouTube demonetization that happens, all the little yellow signs of death, those end up becoming, those are all done via a bot, via an algorithm that detects how your channel operates, what's been good, what's been bad. So there's that, and then you've got a person has to then manually review it. The problem here is that the bot's always learning, and it doesn't always get it right. And the manual review is where it should be taken a look at by a human, and that human then makes a decision. The problem with that, in my opinion, boils down to the fact that the human is then bogged down by bias. The human is then bogged down by their opinion. And since a lot of these companies take place in San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, then it makes it difficult for someone to be non-biased in regards to this. So I don't think they're at the European system just yet. I think the only way for them to not get there is that there has to be a vocal pushback. I don't want people to be censored. I don't. I want people to be able to express their opinions, provided that they're not calling for harm or personal attacks, or personal violence or destruction of private property, and things like that. And this kind of stuff has to be public, right? So good on the leaked person for giving it to Breitbart. The sad thing about this is no other outlet has been covering it. And even though this does have a right-wing spin to the document itself, you can clearly see what Google is thinking about, at least what they've been researching, and then what may happen in the future. And if they follow this, it's only going to get worse, which is really damn unfortunate.